So before we get started on the second part of the Abolition of Man, I've collected some more books. It's really bad. At some point, I should actually read through these. I've got two of the old Wing Commander novels. What I think is all three of the King's Quest novels. Uh, this Ed Greenwood Forgotten Realms. Apparently, there's more in the Forgotten Realms than just Drist. Um, and then I've managed to get my hands on the entire Spelljammer comic collection. So this might give you a bit of an idea of the fiction we'll be reading at some point in the future. But moving on, so stuff to look forward to in the future. But for now, we're going to move on in the Abolition of Man. Let me make sure my phone's muted. The Abolition of Man to the second part, The Way. If you remember in the first part, Lewis got his hands on what he's calling the Green Book, and he's talking about the difference between objectivism and the rejection of these inherent values. So, The Way, which if we go ahead and come down here to The Way, there we are. It opens up with what I think is one of the stronger openings we'll see here. The practical result of education in the spirit of the Green Book must be the destruction of the society which accepts it. This is going to be key to this part and the final part of the book. If you disagree with this opening statement, we need to go back to the first part, reread it until you at least accept that Lewis's argument here makes sense. So, to put this to the test, Lewis is going to return to the example of martyrdom, someone sacrificing for the good of the community. Here he questions how we can reach a purely rational conclusion without accepting that mood or emotion. And this without accepting mood or emotion are things that have value and are real. This is an argument he's going to find hard to make, and he raises one possible solution, which he calls this ethic based on instinct. This argument, he says, is okay, well, you might say that these values don't matter and we can have an ethics based on instinct. But Lewis raises it solely to reject this argument. It's not that instinct isn't helpful, since it's not that instinct just isn't helpful. First, Lewis views it as an undefined term that leaves us with an unanswered why, or specifically, the why that can only be answered by providing something in that gap that instinct gives us. And that's just going to get us back to values or emotions that Gaius and Titius in the Green Book are inherently rejecting. It pushes back the question of what principle determines what we instinctively pick to behind this illusion of instinct as a defense. Man obviously can't use pure rationality, Lewis argues, because that's just choosing between competing instincts. So we have to reject that because something is guiding that choice. It's not an arbitrary choice when we decide between two different instincts. So to do this, we're going to look at a bunch of different philosophies that all have some variant on the same kinds of rules. A universal natural law that Lewis is going to refer to as the Tao in this book. Whether you're looking at Confucianism, Stoicism, or Christianity, he is going to find this through line of natural law or the Tao. This inherent value in all of these philosophies is different from instinct, according to Lewis, because these are not purely biological or rational values. This practical reason cannot be rejected or accepted part and parcel. It either all comes in or it all stays out. You can't pick or choose because either all of the sentiments are usable or good, or they all must go, Lewis is arguing. This interconnected web means that you can't choose the concept of charity as a good but reject the reasoning that gets you to why is charity a good in and of itself. Lewis asks us to try and figure out how someone can justify picking and choosing, and Lewis argues that that's impossible. If you're going to have values, you need some method of deciding on what those values are. For Lewis, this conclusion is simple. It's again comes back to the Tao, the natural law, traditional morality, first principles, whatever you want to call it. It's not just one among a series of values. It is the sole source of value judgments. Without holding on to these original values, the human mind, do I have it here? Do I have it here? The human mind has no more power of inventing a new value than imagining a new primary color. These are inherent truths, like math, right? It's a thing that has not just a value, but a truth value to it. So the next criticism Lewis wants to address is that we can't claim all moralities to be the same. And as in Christianity and Hinduism aren't actually the same moral framework if we actually were to lay them out side by side and do a one-to-one similarity. There's not a 100% overlap. But the same core, this natural law that Lewis says is there, is going to hold true through the vast majority of these things. So again, we're not talking about a one-to-one correlation. We're talking about a through line that you can see connecting everything. What matters here for Lewis is that we see this contradiction, that they're not perfectly analogous. And so instead, we need to approach this with a belief that there is this natural law that has inherent values, and we need to view that in opposition to what subjectivism says we would see from the outside. Those outside of the Tao may be hostile, but cannot be critical, Lewis says. He does not even know what is being discussed. So what Lewis is saying here is that even if you're a subjectivist trying to comment on this natural law, the idea is so alien to you, you can't understand it. Which might be a bit unfair, but the back part of this section instead is going to find a proper way to interrogate these beliefs and rule out this direct attack, because again, it leads to what Lewis sees as just wrong, denying these values exist and are true entirely. Rather, the idea of understanding this has to come from inside the framework that we're working with. So now that we've sort of laid out where we're going to be going next, how is this natural law being undermined, how do we defend it, and what are the ideas that are undermining this, Lewis does take a small tangent here that he's not making a specific argument for theism or Christianity or any specific ism. Rather, this is just an argument towards natural law in general. He's not trying to win you over to Christendom. He's asserting a real moral basis from which man derives value. From there, we can figure out and quibble about what exactly that moral basis is, whether it is Christianity, whether it's some humanistic element to it. Whatever it is, the fact is that Lewis wants us all to agree there is an objective value to things that make things true or real. And then we can figure out what it is that decides that. So Lewis feels that at this point he's covered the idea that there is no natural law. He feels like he's addressed the arguments that have been there. So now that Lewis thinks he has everyone on his side, that everyone agrees, okay, so there might be a natural law, there might be this Tao. So the next logical question when you're dealing with something like the arguments he's seen in the Green Book, he's seen from Gaius and Titius is, well, what if man substitutes a newly created law, one completely man-made, in place of this natural law, this Tao? So on an immediate first glance, Lewis says that we might not see the immediate contradictions compared to the first position of there is no natural law, this replacement. But the difference here is pretty big for Lewis, that there is natural law and man can't just supplant it with this new law. So the position of can we just replace it still holds true, that there are values. And we're now going to debate about deciding and choosing between values. Are we going to be purely rational? Are we going to follow this concept of the Tao? Or are we going to do what people who reject the concept of value altogether are, and have some arbitrary framework for replacing this? And that leads us into the third section, the abolition of man, that we'll talk about next time. But this takes us through the way in which Lewis hopefully pulls together what he sees as the common arguments against the idea of natural law, knocks them down one at a time, and then comes to the conclusion, okay, we now agree that there is a way, there is a Tao. So what do we do about the people who want to undermine or remove the Tao, either intentionally or, like happened in the Green Book, haphazardly, indirectly, by choosing to replace the values with something else, or to just get rid of the concept of value altogether? And that'll take us through the way, and we'll have maybe one, maybe two. Well, maybe we'll talk about the appendice some, but the appendices for this are really just laying out what Lewis thinks is the Tao, which may be interesting, but maybe not. But there we go, our second section on the abolition of man.